Okay, so we have two classes this month on, I call it Nations and Nationalism, and the first is on uh, looking at the role of non-Jews in a Jewish state, and the other second class is going to be the role of um, Jews in a non-Jewish state. So, sort of, what is our just how to think about being a Jewish majority, how to think about being a Jewish minority, um, and the nature of minorities in general in the context of a state. The whole idea of a state, of a nation state, it's a modern idea from the 1800s that suggested that there's sort of bond between people who share the same language and have a common ancestry and come from the same place, and they should govern themselves. Okay, this was a brand new idea in the 19th century as an ideology, and I don't know. You can say it's a good idea, or it's a bad idea, but it was really changed the way the world was organized. Right, in the before before that, there were city states, there were empires. These were multi-ethnic, and without any assumption that there would be so sort of homogeneity, okay, within people with the same territory. Have a seat. Okay, just okay. Didn't miss much. Glad you're here. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, there you are. Okay, thanks for coming. Good. All right. So okay, so let's dive in. Okay, let's look at the psukim. First source from Deuteronomy 7. And at the time Hashem Elokecha lefenecha, this is when Lord your God shall deliver them before you. These are regarding the conquest of Eretz Canaan. You shall smite them and utterly destroy them. Tacharim atem lo tichrot lehem brit v'lo tichanim. Okay, don't have any covenant with them. Don't make any treaties with them. And lo tichanem, which literally is translated here as don't show any mercy toward them, like chen means grace or favor. Lo tichanem. Okay, it's a very severe. This is the prohibition. This is the and to extirpate the Canaanite inhabitants of Eretz Canaan following the conquest. Deuteronomy 20, it's sort of spelled out exactly who this is referring to. Ki acharem tachrimem, achiti v'amori v'chanani v'aprizi v'achivi v'yusi v'kasher tzivah Hashem eloket. Right, so you shall utterly destroy the Hittite and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Perizzite, the Hivite and the Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Again, another very kind of severe. Let me share. Hello, welcome. Let me share the source sheet again. Prohibition against having any of these remnants of these nations inside the territory that Bnei Israel are supposed to control. And let's see how Rambam just sort of codifies this in the third source. Let's say from Mitzvah, Kuf Pei Zayin 4900. There's the translation and the look. The translation and the Hebrew source are reversed. See that? There are two sources from Sefer. No. That's it's just the flip. Sorry, the translation. So I'll read in Hebrew. Okay, forget about it. Yeah, mitzvah group. The 187th mitzvah is that we're commanded to kill the 7 nations and to utterly destroy them. Shema Shoresh of Adazar, they are the roots of idolatry and its first foundation. And God said in Parashat Shoftim, Deuteronomy 20, which is the source above. And this is explained in many verses. So the reason why these 7 Canaanite nations have to be destroyed is because we would learn from them and worship idols. And so it seems that the non-Jewish inhabitants of Eretz Canaan are soon to be idol worshippers, and the reason for wiping them out is because lest we worship idols. There's no so some other categories that need to be explored. What about idolaters who aren't from these 7 Canaanite nations? Perhaps they're like less potent forms of idolaters. And what about Gentiles who aren't idol worshippers? None of that is.
Like, what about the Egyptians?
Egyptians are not assumed to be in Eretz Yisrael. Meaning,
no, I know, but why is the polemic against idolatry so focused
on Eretz Canaan? I think the point, that's a good question, right? I think the point is that we're supposed to set up a society that's monotheistic, and so we can't allow a idolatrous remnant to live amongst us, whereas the Egyptians are presumably someplace far, or presumed to be someplace farther away. It's a good point, though. Yeah, and just once you jump from the biblical period, or even not even the biblical period, the Torah's predictions of or commands of what would happen. So first of all, it never actually happened, right? I mean, the idolatry is throughout Eretz Canaan, Eretz Israel after the conquest, and as you can see very clearly in Tanakh. And once you get to the period of the Mishnah, where someone can you buzz them and just press talk and then the key thing in succession. You got it? If you press the key, it opens it. If you press it should be open. Yeah. Press key. There's a little key, there's a little button here. Looks like they made it.
Oh, try it.
Yeah, something like that.
Right. Once you get to the Mishnah, where you look at Masechet Avodah Zarah, there's no. It's all about how to live amongst them and how to maintain our difference. So there's no pretense that we would be destroying idolatry or idols or anything like that. None of that iconic classic, anything is there anymore. Hello. Okay, welcome. Yeah, and again, you can see, so just to summarize what we have right now, these first page of sources suggests as a biblical prohibition against having idol worshippers live in Eretz Canaan. There should be, and the reason for this prohibition is that we should not learn from their idolatry. And Rambam accepts this and brings this down. And I'm quoting Rambam a lot because he's the one who Rambam is unique among the medieval halachic writers. He writes about theoretical halakha, right? So he lists all the mitzvot and he codifies all of the mitzvot, even those that are completely not practiced. Okay. And again, there is no treatment in the Torah of a Gentile who isn't an idol worshiper. That's like an idea that hadn't been invented yet or something. Like that's not on the horizon. And so this linkage is very direct between idol worship and these Canaanite nations, and they therefore can be maintained in Eretz Israel. In the bottom of page 1, the last source from the Rambam again, mitzvah hanun al 51st prohibition, shez hiranu, we're prohibited mehoshiv ovdi avodah zarah. We can't allow any worshippers of avodah zarah. Turn the page 2. Be'artzeinu kadei shelo nomad mikviratam. Okay, we can't allow any idol worshippers within our land, lest we learn from them. And then he continues, even if they just wants to pass through our land, we're not allowed to do so unless he accepts upon himself not to worship idols. Once he does so, he's allowed to reside in Eretz Israel, and he is called a ger toshav, meaning that he's considered a convert only to the extent that he's allowed to reside in our land. Our sages said, who is a ger toshav? One who accepts upon himself not to worship idols. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. An idol worshiper, however, is not allowed to reside in our land, and we do not sell him land or rent to him. The oral tradition states clearly you may not allow him any residence in the land. The details of this mitzvah have been explained in Sanhedrin and in Masechet Avodah Zarah. So Rambam here is expanding the prohibition. It's not just about the 7 Canaanite nations that have to be removed. It's any idol worshiper has to be prevented from coming into Eretz Israel, and he also has to prevent even a temporary, can't even pass through. And if he has to accept not to worship idols, and that is the definition the Rambam says of a ger toshav. Ger toshav is a term that doesn't really appear in the Torah. The Torah talks about the ger, the stranger, and it's left to the rabbis to figure out what that means. There are two types. It could be a ger, what we would call, what Chazal call, what the rabbis call a ger tzedek, who's a convert, who's somebody fully Jewish, or a ger toshav is someone who's not Jewish, but we're supposed to support their presence in Eretz Israel, living amongst us. The Rambam says this is somebody who doesn't worship idols. So a Gentile who doesn't worship idols, that's a ger toshav. He can come, he can pass through Eretz Israel, but somebody who worships idols can't even be present. You don't let him, don't give him an entry visa. Yes.
But Christians.
Yeah, we'll get there. We got the good question, right? So I guess we'll say one other thing. All the 7 Canaanite nations, they don't exist anymore, right? The Talmud says that when Sennacherib came, the Assyrian king, and he conquered the whole region, all the Middle Eastern tribes and nations were all mixed up and they intermarried, and none of them are left except for Jews. So all of these biblical peoples, the only ones that are left are Jews. And so any of these halachic identity, including the Egyptians and all of the Edomites, and all of these people have distinct identities in Tanakh. none of those exist anymore. Those are not statuses that have any halakhic weight whatsoever. Egyptian, Amalekite, Moabite, or any of these Canaanite nations, they don't exist anymore. So really, we're left with this question of what about in this imagined situation where Jews have control over a piece of territory? Do we allow idolaters who are not from the 7 Canaanite nations, because those nations don't exist anymore, to have any presence in the land? RabbI says no. Okay, if they worship idols. Yeah, yeah.
You said that Egyptians.
Yeah,
Were,
yeah.
Were.
Also, yeah, mixed.
also
Yeah,
mixed up
yeah,
in everybody
yeah.
because of their.
Yes, I mean the Torah says, you're not allowed. Egyptian can't. You have to wait a certain number of generations before an Egyptian can marry it, right? So that's you could some that's not yeah. Someone from Egypt today, a contemporary Egyptian, can convert to Judaism and be treated no differently than anyone else who would convert to Judaism. There is no halachic status of an Egyptian anymore. Yeah. And I think it's historically kind of true. I don't think there was a lot of mixing of peoples over the last, 3,000 years. A lot's happened. A lot of history has happened. So it's not okay. So now we're jumping from the second paragraph on page 2. This is from Mishnah Torah. So Rambam, right, he wrote Sefer HaMitzvot. That's his, he wrote that in Arabic, and that's he sort of lists all the mitzvot and describes them, but in Mishnah Torah, he wrote that in Hebrew, in very careful Hebrew, and sort of sets things out in a little bit more detail. And kol hadrim ha'elu amarim ela bizman shegal Yisrael bein avod avdei kochavim o yad akum tikifa Yisrael. Everything above, okay, whatever that is, that's only if we're not in charge. Avad bizman sheyad Yisrael tikifa, when the Jews are in charge, asor lanu niach avdei kochavim beinenu. We can't allow any idol worship in our midst. Vafilu yoshev yeshivat arai over makom makom b'schora lo yavor bartzenu ela. Okay. Shnemar lo yeshu bartzecha filu lefi sha'ah. V'im kebel alav shav mitzvot harei zeger toshav. So even if we're in charge, nobody who worships idols can get an entry visa, even temporarily. They have to commit to following all of the 7 mitzvot of Noah, okay, including they can't worship idols. And that turns them into a ger toshav. A ger toshav is a resident alien, a Gentile who's allowed to live in our midst because doesn't worship idols. But you can't get that status because the Yovel is not in existence. The Yovel is the biblical Jubilee year, which is only practiced when the entirety of the Jewish people are living back in Eretz Israel and our tribal heritage has somehow been restored, and the lands go back to their ancestral owners every 50 years. And that kind of full vision of Jewish control of Eretz Israel, which has not occurred. Only in that setting do we allow somebody to come a ger toshav. Until then, I guess maybe because we're still fighting for control over the land in some way, right? We're not fully settled there. We can't accept a ger toshav. So RabbI is saying there should be no Gentiles at all, it seems, based on this statement. But in a time where there's no Yovel, without the Jubilee, the only type of ger, the only type of stranger we can accept is a ger tzedek, somebody who commits to becoming fully Jewish. This ger toshav status of the non-Jew who lives amongst, right? That is, but doesn't pertain. So the RabbI writes a comment here. The RabbI is this great Provençal scholar, one of the greatest of the Rishonim, except unlike the Rambam, he was not a very good writer. He didn't have the same style as him, but he was very good at writing critiques. So he wrote a little gloss on the Rambam, and that is perhaps how he's most famous today. But he was one of the greatest. So he writes on this comment here that he says, look at the little aleph on the top line of page 3, that aleph. That's where the RabbI picks up. Zot lematzanu v'lo shemanu mi'olam. Okay, this I don't know where the Rambam got this from. He's saying that we don't accept a ger toshav now. You can't go through this process now, and even to temporarily pass through the borders of our land. I don't know. And the pasuk shehu mevi mizsheva amotu, right? The verse that the Rambam is quoting to support his claim, that's a verse in the Torah that's referring only to the 7 Canaanite nations, but that to apply that to any Gentile or even any idol worshiper, that is not. That's not. I don't know. That's just not true. That he thinks it's a misreading of the Rambam. That he got it wrong.
Where did even Rambam get that?
Unclear. Yeah. I don't know. Well, from here actually. Let's look at the next. Let's look at the next from this source probably from the second is the second source on page 3. This is going back. So we're jumping back to the Talmud. To where did the Rabbin get this from? So the Gemara asks, Ezahu ger toshav. Who is a ger toshav? What is the status of ger toshav? This Gentile who can live here amongst us. Anyone who stands for 3 chaverim, 3 sages of some kind, 3 chaverim, 3 honored members of the community, and commits not to worship idols. That's Rabbi Meir's position. So you have to actually go through a kind of quasi conversion process to commit not to worshiping idols to get this entry visa.
That's from Rabbi Meir.
Yes, the sages say kol shekibel alav shev mitzvot shekibu lehem beinav. They actually have to be beyond. It's not just one mitzvah that I'm going to not worship idols. You have to take on all 7 mitzvot of the children of Noah. Okay, it's a next stage. Gesundheit. There are people who have there's the thing now. There are people who have accepted upon themselves the 7 mitzvot of the Noah. Like as a religious identity. Like they are not Jewish. They're not converted to Judaism. They don't practice, but they don't practice any other religion, and they follow this Noachide path. Chabad has invested a little bit in them. They will sometimes send rabbis to help them, teach them how to pray and guide them. Someone from such a family married one of my cousins. After she converted, her parents couldn't convert to Judaism because they couldn't keep Shabbos because of like professional reasons. I think her mother was a nurse or had a position in healthcare, could not figure out how to do her job and keep Shabbos, so she didn't, and she remained a Gentile. But they formed out in Texas. They found a group of like-minded B'nai Noach, right? America's a wild place, right? And some years later, their daughter became Jewish. Yeah.
I forgot the 7 Noahide laws.
Oh, what are they? They're no murder, no idolatry, no stealing, not eating limb from a living animal, incest, adultery, blasphemy, and they have to set up courts. System of justice. 7. All right. Whew, okay, glad I passed. Okay, yeah, good. Okay. Others say, Elu lo banu klal. No, this is not a ger toshav. That's not what a ger toshav is. Who's a ger toshav? Ze ger ochel nevilot. Shegabel alav lakem kol mitzvot hamur b'torah chutz misur nevila. This is a convert who accepts all the mitzvot except for he's going to eat non-kosher meat, which sounds like a pretty good deal, right? Why does he say that? Because the Torah says, what does the Torah say about nevela? The Torah says that this non-kosher meat, it says you should give it to the ger. So there must be this category of people who are living among us who are eating all these non-kosher meat. So they've totally bought into the system. They're like fully Jewish. They come to minyan every morning and they keep Shabbos, but they eat non-kosher meat. So this is it could be a good solution to the crisis of, go on, yeah. Yeah.
I met somebody once when we were traveling in the United States. It was a very observant couple, and the woman covered her hair, everything very observant. But he came to it.
Yeah.
He wasn't born, so he came to it. And we had like a true confessions one night. And he said to us that he observes everything all year long. Yeah. Except one day a year.
Oh my gosh.
He goes out and eats straight.
That's incredible. Really? 100%. Unbelievable.
100%. And the rest is really very, very religious.
You know the story about the man who invites his charusa to his son's bar mitzvah. They've been learning together for 10 years, and he's making bar mitzvah. He said to his charusa, "I want you to have an aliyah at my son's bar mitzvah because that's what our charusa means to me." And the charusa says, "I'm so honored. I'm so touched, but I have to tell you, I'm actually not Jewish. I just love learning Torah so much, but I'm not actually Jewish. I can't take the aliyah." He said, "You're not Jewish, but I'm really not. I just love, but you come to shul. I know, I just love it, but we've just learned, it says in the Yochanan says in the Gemara and the Avodah Zarah that a ger sheshavat chayav mita, that a Gentile is not allowed to keep Shabbos. How can you keep Shabbos? Because I don't keep Shabbos. I have a key that I keep in my pocket. I carry it around on Shabbos, so I'm breaking Shabbos like in that subtle way. No one notices that I always have a key in my pocket." And he says, "But there's an eruv." He says, "I don't hold by that eruv." Okay. Anyway. All right, that's a good one. All right, that's good. Bottom of source 3, you can see what the Rambam does with this source. Ezehu ger toshav. Well, who is the ger toshav? Za'akum shiva olav shelo yavod avodah zara im shar hamitzvot shenesavu b'nei noach. So the Rambam says the ger toshav is, he takes that middle position, that the ger toshav is he doesn't worship idols, but he also accepts the other 7 mitzvot. V'lo ma v'lo tava. So no circumcision, no immersion in the mikvah. So you accept him. Vahu mechaside umos is one of the pious of the nations. Very nice. The Lama Nikra Shemo Toshav. Why is it called a ger toshav, a resident stranger? Lefi shemutar lanu hashivenu beinenu be'eretz Yisrael kamosh v'yarnu. So this because a ger toshav, because he's a ger who's allowed to live amongst us in Eretz Yisrael. So the ger who lives amongst us is someone who's committed to all the 7 mitzvot of Einach in some sort of formal process. Okay. This is okay. The next part will just okay. We could have skipped this. We'll do this because this next one is a little bit of a tangent, but it's I think it fills in our picture, and it's a very important Rambam also. Okay, this is another also in the Rambam. Moshe Rabbeinu lo hinchil haTorah v'mitzvot el Yisrael. So Moshe didn't give the Torah and its mitzvot to anyone other than Israel. Right? We're not a universal proselytizing religion. Shneimar Morashah Kilat Yaakov. It's the inheritance of Kilat Yaakov. V'chol harotzeh litkayer mishar mot. And anybody who wants to convert from all the other nations, that's great. Shneimar kachem kager. Like you should be no different than the ger, the Torah says. So the Torah was given to us and to any convert. But if someone doesn't want to, we don't force them to accept the Torah and mitzvot. However, we are commanded to force everyone on earth to follow the mitzvot of Bnei Noach, and we should kill anyone who doesn't. So that we are a proselytizing religion, just not for Judaism, for this Noachide code. And one who accepts the 7 mitzvot, that is the ger toshav. The chomakom, and that's as referred to in all rabbinic and Torah writings, that is the ger toshav. And that requires a conversion process. He has to stand before 3 judges or 3 chaverim. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, if you accept to final and go through circumcise yourself and you don't, so that's then you're just like not Jewish. Okay, like the conversion doesn't take place. The next line, anybody who accepts upon himself these 7 mitzvot of Noah, this is one of that person, a pious among the nations. Very nice. He has a portion of the world to come. Beautiful. The Okay, but in order to be a chasidei umot olam and receive this portion of what's to come, you have to follow the 7 mitzvot because Moshe taught that in the Torah. You can't just, right? It has to be from the Torah, and that's the source of this observance. About im asaan mipnei hakra hadat, if he does them just based on his own knowledge, his own sort of reason, ein ze ger toshav, that doesn't make him a ger toshav. Neither is he of the chasidei umot olam, the pious of the nations. Neither is he amongst their wise people. So that's a little bit of a restrictive paragraph at the end. However, this is one of because he thinks that
it's he's basically saying that ultimately there isn't a kind of rational.
There is, yeah. Correct. So this is one of those great cases where a little line makes a big difference because the printed Rambam say he is not michasidei umot olam v'lo mechachmehem, is not one of the pious of the nations nor of their wise ones. But if instead of v'lo, if that vav had a little thing and becomes an aleph, then he's not one of their pious ones, but he is one of their wise ones, which is what the Oxford manuscript has, which is the version that the Rambam himself signed off on. So if you go with that version, it's a much more inclusive Rambam at the end. Okay, so more in line with Spinoza, right?
Then Cohen tries to rescue Memnon's.
Okay.
Part to that.
All right.
What's interesting here is that it's like machshava k'maaseh, but it doesn't really. That contradicts this a little bit.
You could say
you can do it.
Yes. Correct, right. In other words, yeah, it's not enough to be like a good person if you don't realize. I think yes, why does he care so much about that you're doing these things because it's from the Torah as opposed to why should it matter? It's a good question. It's a very good question. What I want to take from all of this is that it's the position of the Rambam. It's very what is the role of a non-Jew in a Jewish state? It's only the Ger Toshav, and the Ger Toshav is somebody who has basically bought into this Jewish system of like, since I'm not a descendant of Abraham, I don't have to keep all the mitzvot, but I am the son of Noah. So the Torah has these 7 mitzvot for me that I've committed in front of a Beit Din, that I'm going to observe them, and then I can live amongst, the Jewish people in the Jewish land, and I can eat the treif meat that they give me. Okay, but that seems to be it's a very restrictive role. Okay, so let's see some other pieces. So part 2. So Gemara in Avodah Zarah as another prohibition that we saw, lo tichanem, do not show them any favor, not show them any mercy, lo tichanem. But the Gemara interprets that lo titen lehem chaniyah b'karka, don't give them any foothold on the land, and you can't sell them land. Other opinions, you can't give them any presents, don't give them any favor. Okay, so who does that apply to? There's a prohibition against selling land in Eretz Yisrael to some category of people. Is that the 7 Canaanite nations? Is that all idolaters? Is that anyone who's not Jewish? Who does that category include? So for the Rambam, it's really would be anyone who has an exception to 7 mitzvot during a time when the Jubilee year, right? The Jubilee is functional, and until then, they shouldn't even pass through, right? They certainly can't sell them land unless there's a Jubilee. Okay, but for others, have a difference. The Meiri is the second source on the third source, that last paragraph on page 5. Meiri says, you already know how strict the Torah is to keep idolatry. And the Meiri, sort of interesting thing about the Meiri, I'll just say, he was the full writings of the Meiri were not printed until the 20th century. They were only known in excerpts quoted by other scholars. The manuscripts were held, I think, in the Vatican Library and were released and printed for the first time, I think, in the 1930s. So it's one of the great.
Which manuscripts is this?
Yes, yeah. So the Meiri, he sort of has a couple of really interesting, somewhat maverick positions, and wasn't really part of the halachic debate for many centuries because he wasn't printed. No one read the Meiri, right? So we have more, books in this library, than many people had, right? There's a lot, yeah. Okay, so he said. So one of the really distinctive things about the Meiri, he has a very distinct and unique perspective on Gentiles, as we'll see. You already know how strict the Torah is to keep idolatry far away from our land and our borders and from us. And in many instances, it goes to great lengths to warn us and keep us away from their actions. And from this perspective, the Torah says, lo techanem, do not show them any grace, that is, to praise them or their actions or even their beauty or form. Similarly, we're asked not to give them any hold on the land, lo techanem, right? So that their dwelling amongst us will not be permanent, and so that we are not, and so too, we were asked not to give them any presents, so that we don't indirectly steal them from a more worthy recipient, namely a ger toshav, which is a full descendant of Noah, gives all the 7 mitzvot of Noah, as the Torah says, to the ger in your gate you shall give it to eat or sell to a foreigner. Nonetheless, the Tosefta modifies and says that this only applies to a Gentile one does not know, if he is passing from place to place. However, if he was a neighbor or a friend, it is permissible, for he is as one of those known to us, as being from the nations that are bound by the boundaries of religious ethics. I read in Hebrew, mutar shehu kemuchran lo, mukaran lo, ha-kol shehu min ha'umot ha'gedurot b'darchei hadatot, b'shemodot be'elohut, ein safek she'af v'she'ein makiro mutar v'ra'ui kvar amru shalom, sholech adam yerech l'nech, etc. So if you know the person to be ethical, or if you know them to be from a nation that acknowledges God, then all of these restrictions, these sort of monetary restrictions that discriminate against Gentiles don't apply. And this is consistent throughout the writings of Meiri. And you can find 6 or 7 places where he has this concept, umot hagedurot b'darchei hadatot, nations that are bound by the way, the path, darchei hadatot, the ways of religion. So they live a moral lifestyle, and once you define a group in that way, then all of the halachic restrictions that discriminate against Gentiles don't pertain to them, including, he lived in, I want to say, the 13th to the early 14th century in Provence.
It's interesting. I mean, is it are there precedents for this term dot being used in the kind of?
I'm not aware.
And
That's a
what
great
was the answer?
question. Yeah.
Religion?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of that phrase having anyone before him who uses it. There's some who wanted to suggest that the Provençal Christians were Albigensians, who were, however you pronounce it, who were not maybe such Orthodox Christians, and so maybe they were like more monotheistic than Orthodox Christians, and that's why he said such things about them. That seems to me a little bit far. I'm not convinced by that. I think, yeah, he had a position that that these civil discriminations about like civil law, that what you can give them, what you can allow them, what you can sell to them, if there's like some basic decency and reciprocity, and they treat us nicely, we can treat them nicely, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's very helpful. So there's lots of written on them areas. Yeah.
But aren't we talking about non-Jews in the Jewish state?
Precisely. So in other words, right, correct. The Provence has nothing to do with that, like, other than it maybe is what influences his perspective on who are these non-Jews that we might. So when he's imagining what Jews would do in a place that we control, he's thinking of French, Provençal, people, maybe. Okay. Let's get to part 3, okay? Because this, well, whatever. The Gemara. Let's not skip the. Let's do the Gemara and Avodah. The mission here, Ein Maskrin. So another mission said, Ein Maskrin Lehem Batim Be'Eretz Yisrael Ve'Ein Tzarich Lamar B'Sadot. You can't sell them homes in Eretz Yisrael. Even more so, we can't sell them fields. And Syria, like, so the boundary area, but today, is like not fully Eretz Yisrael, but like a little bit quasi Eretz Yisrael. We can rent them homes, but we can't rent them fields. And Chutz La'aretz, we can sell them. We can sell them homes and rent them fields. That's what Meir says. Rabbi Yossi Omer be'Eretz Yisrael maskirin lehem batim aval lo sadot. So it's like one step lower, right? You can rent, etc. So I don't go through the whole thing. I want to point out the Gemara opens my tzrich lamar sadot. Why would you be stricter with fields than with houses? So the Gemara says. So when it comes to agricultural land, we're stricter because not only is there this issue of giving Gentiles a foothold in Eretz Yisrael, there's also the issue of taking out this land from a territory from which you would have an obligation to take Truman and Maasrot, or and give these tithes from it, because if non-Jew is farming it, he's not going to give tithes, and so that's an additional reason for stringency. Okay, so I wanted to show that because that becomes relevant. It's an added piece of sort of into the halachic calculus. So none of this all becomes relevant for the first time in the 19th century with the return of modern farmers, Jewish farmers, to Eretz Yisrael. Why do they want to? Why would they? So not in a position to allow or not allow sale of any land, other than the fact that in 1888, I believe. After the Aliyah, it was the first Shemitah year after the Chovevei Tzion movement was founded, and they had these very fledgling agriculture in Rishon LeZion and Chadera, like fledgling agriculture, and if they didn't farm for a year, it would all be lost. And so, right, Mahalover in Europe said they could sell the land to a Gentile for that year, and then they could continue to farm it if it was owned by a Gentile, and in that way, and then get it back from them at the end of the year. Very similar, kind of to selling chametz or for Pesach, sell the land to a Gentile, right? This was very controversial. The Netziv, for example, was very opposed to this. He felt he had been a supporter of Chovevei Tzion, of this movement, but he thought the whole point of restoring these farms in Eretz Yisrael, so that we can observe the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael, we can observe Shemitah. That's and to go to Eretz Yisrael and not observe Shemitah, that he felt that was like defeating the whole purpose. So this was for him was like a breaking point, and he stopped his involvement in the Chovevei Tzion movement. But nonetheless, obviously it continued. I think 4 Shemitahs later, 1907, 1909, you can count. I don't know if you count by 7. So I think it was 4 Shemitah later. Rav Kook is already in Yafo, and that was the first Shemitah year that he was the rabbi in Yafo. And so he wrote a book called Shabbat Haaretz, which is defending a lengthier, sort of more elaborate defense of this Heter Mechira, selling the land to a Gentile so it can be farmed during the Shemitah year. This is not what that is. This is from his collection of Sheilot Tshuvot, but it's about the Heter Mechira. And so there are a couple of issues that have to be worked through in order to justify the Heter Mechira. One is you have to permit selling the land to a Gentile. You have to, right, which we saw as halakhically fraught. And second, you also have to, even if you do, does it in fact nullify the obligation to observe Shemitah? If the Gentile owns it, is that fine? Can the Jew still work that land if the Gentile owns it, right? So those are some among the issues that have to be worked through. So regarding the selling the land to a Gentile, he says, the Yishmaelim, the Arabs, don't have the status of Ger Toshav, because after all, the Rambam says to be a Ger Toshav, to go to a Beit Din, you have to commit to being a Ger Toshav, and maybe it doesn't apply when there's no Jubilee year. Okay, so the Tzif says the Arabs don't have the status of Ger Toshav, you can't sell the land. Then the Rav Kook says, Ein Zebarur, Klal, the Dad Harai. That according to the RabbI, though, as we saw, he disagrees with the Rambam, so it's not so true. And especially his very lengthy comment in his gloss in chapter 14, etc. Certainly not simple. That to say that there's no such thing as ger toshav, bisman hazeh, contemporary times without the Jubilee, not so simple at all to say that. Oh, that's funny. That's a typo. Okay, the Hilchot Avodah Zarah Perek Yod. Shli Shivat Haaretz Ein Tzarich Yovel. Yet that you don't need the Yovel in order for this. Okay, to let them live in the land. V'yesh Lo Asher Hu Adin LeInyan Haniyah B'Karka. So too with even selling the land. With Achol Inyan Schirut, and certainly lending it, like renting the land for 1 year. Certainly you can allow Ger Toshav to rent temporarily. But Kevin Shein Tzarich Yovel, and you don't need the Yovel for that. Afagad Tzarich Beitin Shal Shasham Mikom Mikom Hu Kedai Kadesh Yep. Pearson the Devar Shekibel Alav Yesh Lashu Uma Shlema. Here's the that's important. You could also say She'uma Shlema. In other words, sorry, you might think that the Beit Din, the need for the court is only for it. Like, why need a court to establish somebody as a Ger Toshav? It's not a status change like becoming Jewish or converting to Judaism, where the court effectuates the change in status. If you're like a Beit Din oversees a conversion or something.
Well, maybe
Here,
because of this, maybe because of their ability to buy to work the land.
Yes, he says the Beit Din is not. He says the Beit Din, though, isn't affecting the change of status. The Beit Din is just for the point of publicizing the change of status. Like, he's a Ger Toshav if he doesn't worship idols, and the Beit Din just certifies that. But the certification doesn't. Like a rabbi says something kosher doesn't make it kosher. Just the rabbi's just certifying that it's kosher. It's kosher before the rabbi says so. The rabbi's just, I investigate it's kosher. So the guy was a Ger Toshav. The Beit Din is just sort of publicizing it so people know they can sell on land. And so when you have Umash Shlema, an entire nation, Shehui Menaheget, V'nimusin, Ke'ela, Yu Chashuvim, like entire nation is monotheistic. And avoiding idolatry and have a system of courts and they don't murder, right? So that's the status of a Ger Toshav, and you don't need the Beit Din for each individual to say, you're certified a Ger Toshav, you can buy land. It could be that an entire nation, ethnic group, can have this status automatically by being part of a collective that has these religious practices. So that's I think an important point. That's how Rambam pushes back against some of these restrictions. That's Rav Kook pushes back on the Rambam, and the Rambam says, well, you need a Beit Din to give someone a Ger Toshav. No, so for Rav Kook, you could sell land to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael, even if they are, even without a Beit Din kind of certifying them as a Ger Toshav. Yeah.
Like, wasn't there an issue for like the Rambam also about like whether you like this idea of power? Are you whether like Jews are exercising power over the land or not? Or is that not material? Because it just seemed like. Let me go back and see if I can.
I think he's writing only when Jews. Obviously, yeah. I think everything we saw in the Rambam is only when Jews have power. If Jews don't have power, I don't think you can't stop anyone from it. Meaning in terms of like a sale. Oh, no. I think where Jews have power, you wouldn't even allow them into Eretz Yisrael unless they're a Ger Toshav. But if Jews don't have power, you can't stop who's there. But there's still a prohibition against selling land. So I think that would those are two different issues. There's allowing them to be present, and then there's selling them land are different issues. Okay.
The last line here says that in foundation was according to the ethical code, such as the Arabs, would be considered a Ger Toshav.
Yeah.
Right? So why over the past decades,
Yeah.
selling land apartments.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
works was very
Yeah, we'll see. We'll get there. Good. Very good. Very good. So it's very good. We'll get there. We'll get there. Excellent. Excellent question. Excellent question. And the answer is, short answer is regression, but you're right. The Rav Kook already, yeah, good point. Okay. Rav Herzog was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. He had this agenda after the state was established of trying to figure out a way to halakhically, to take the laws of a modern state and give it like a halachic framework for understanding it, right? In a modern state, everyone equal rights for all citizens, and you have men and women serving as judges, and you have all these things that a modern state has that you wouldn't expect from a halachic state. And so he says, how does a halachic state kind of accommodate what a modern state has? And among them is minority rights. How could a Jewish state allow non-Jews to have freedom of worship? So he writes, okay. The question of minority rights, that is, those of Arabs and Christians living in the land of Israel, which the United Nations insisted upon when empowering us to found the Jewish state, is the most problematic issue regarding the state's democratic character. The United Nations will certainly insist most strenuously that at least in state civil and legal matters, minority rights will not be infringed upon, and that minorities enjoy complete freedom to uphold their religions and the education of their communities. Against this background, we turn to the problem of minority rights, or better, the rights of the minority, that is, the Arab populace within the Jewish state. So he's sort of, the framework even is like, we were given this opportunity to have a state on condition that we respect the rights of minorities and there be equal civil rights. So that was the condition by which the United Nations authorized the creation of a Jewish state. And so we could sort of take it or leave it, okay? And we took it, but now we have to figure out how is that, okay? He says, this is obviously extras, all these grounds for leniency that I skipped over are superfluous, for even if the case at hand concerned real idolaters, so Christians and Muslims don't worship, fine. Even if they were idolaters, in my opinion, legally speaking, there is no transgression involved in allowing them freedom of worship in a Jewish state. The commandments under discussion are public commandments. They're not addressed to particular individuals, but to the governing body that is a Jewish government, whatever its form or regime, that is powerful enough to discharge them. In the absence of this background, and given the realistic circumstances where the state is given to us under this condition of minority rights and freedom of worship, these commandments do not apply. Such is the case in exile or even land of Israel, when the Gentiles' power is predominant. We don't have sovereignty. Jewish sovereignty is a bit of a myth in Medinat Yisrael. So there's no individual obligation on any Jewish person to prevent an idolater from having freedom of worship in the state of Israel. And the government has no obligation because the government isn't actually fully sovereign. Okay, there's like a family of nations that has expectations of what civilized behavior is, and in that context, the state of Israel is not fully sovereign, or full sovereignty is a bit of a myth.
So this to Shalamagi.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Also, we must take into account the explicitly stated purpose of these laws as written in the Torah, lest they cause you to sin, that we should not be influenced by them and by their worship. Would anyone deny that the danger of Jews being influenced by Gentiles is greater when the Jews are subject to Gentiles, whether in exile or land of Israel, than when the Jews are not subject to the Gentiles? In other words, like if the point we have a better chance, let's accept the offer of a Jewish state, even on the condition that we have to allow Gentiles to have freedom of worship, because we're still better off. Judaism will still be protected better that way than if we refuse the offer and say, no, we can only have a Jewish state if we get to have a fully halachic state. No, take what you can get now, because you can. That's actually what the Torah really cares about, is the ability of a collective to promote Judaism. And finally, we must take into account consideration the fact that the very founding of the state is a kind of partnership. It is as if Gentiles, let us say even heathens, agreed to allow us to create a joint government in which we have a recognized preeminence, and the state will still bear our name, but it's not a really Jewish. It's a Jewish state. It's really just like a pretense, okay? Like that, because we're the majority, we get to call it the state of Israel and say it's a Jewish state. But really, halakhically, at its essence, Medinat Israel is a shutfut. It's a partnership between the Jewish minority and the Gentile minority, on condition that everyone has freedom of worship and equal civil rights. But it's not actually a Yad Yisrael Tekifa, as the Rambam would describe it, or as the halakhic sources. So there's no obligation to have a fully halakhic state, or no expectation that we would try to wipe out idolatry or prevent freedom of worship, because from the very outset, what's happening here is not really a Jewish state. It's a Jewish majority state in partnership with the Gentile minority on conditions that we promise equal civil rights to everyone.
That just as an aside.
Yeah.
That doesn't there are other countries that are religious countries.
Correct.
I'm not so sure that he's saying kinds of.
Is it really, really true that every nation, the family of nations, has to offer equal rights to every religion? So they don't, obviously, but I think he is right that that was the condition under which the United Nations authorized the creation of Israel. I mean, the Balfour Declaration makes that clear, and the UN Partition Plan makes that clear, and Israel was admitted to the United Nations on that. And furthermore, Israel actually promised that. If you look at on page 11, you have the Israeli Declaration of Independence, which recounts the whole history of the Jewish presence in Israel, and then says, it's long, page 14. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all nations, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. So not only what Herzog is saying was that was the t'nai, that was the condition on which the option was given. It was actually a pledge made in the declaration itself, which, if you look at the last source, we'll skip it and go back, and the very last source on page 17, Rav Amital Zatzal felt that the Declaration of Independence had the halachic status of a neder, the halachic status of a vow that was made by the Jewish people in the most public forum possible to promise equal civil and political rights to everyone, regardless of race and ethnicity, etc. And therefore that has a halachic status. And he compares to the Givonim. You must remember how the sages regarded the episode of the Givonim in Joshua chapter 9, despite the fact that Yahushua's oath to protect the Givonim had no halachic validity, since it was based on the deception perpetrated by the Givonim. The Israelites did not kill them because of the desecration of God's name that this would have involved, as described in the Talmud in Masechet Gittin. The obligation of sanctifying God's name and refraining from desecrating it require the fulfillment of every promise that is made by the leaders of the nation pertaining to the welfare of non-Jews. I am not aware of any more public national promise than Israel's scroll of independence, which was signed by all the leaders of the state and which explicitly promised equal rights to all non-Jewish minorities. The official promise then has obligatory halachic weight based on the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem and the prohibition of Chil Hashem. You promise something, you have to keep it, even if you promise something under false pretenses. Like Yeshua made an oath to the Givonim, he would protect them. They lied to them. They told them they were not from where they were from. But nonetheless, once a public promise, if you go back on it, it looks bad. It makes Jews look like they're not trustworthy, and therefore you can't do that. And so Rav Amital felt that the Declaration of Independence had the status of a neder. I think there are many other things that the leaders of the state have promised over the years, and I see no reason to treat them any differently. Yeah.
So, I mean, look, how would Rav Amital have applied this, to the West Bank?
Right, where it doesn't say, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I think.
I'm not sure, what's your question?
There are
Well, he's saying that, in the Declaration of Independence,
Right.
Israel, made essentially a neder, to, provide equal rights to all non-Jewish minorities. So, I mean, it's not like, I would think that, either you have to choose, either then, you are controlling this territory, you have to grant them full rights, or you just, or what right does he even have to be there then?
Yeah. So I think there are people who I'm sure discuss this with him. I think he would say that it's the current status is a temporary status, and either it will be annexed to, or just to part of the state of Israel, in which case there'll be full political rights offered to all the residents, or it'll be relinquished to some other. He was in favor of territorial compromise, and so I think for him, the issue that you're raising, sort of this contradiction between the fact that there aren't equal rights offered, provided to all of the inhabitants in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, in Gaza, even though they're under the control of Israel. I think he would have felt that was a temporary situation that will be solved by negotiations, which he supported. So, which I think was a reasonable thing to hope for and believe for some amount of years, and at some point it becomes less and less tenable to say this is a temporary situation that we hope will end. So I think the Israel also made pledges though about territory, about respecting the borders of all the nations. Like in the 50s, the Israeli government claimed to be opposed to any modification of the armistice line. So I think that there are all sorts of promises that. So that's the question I would want to ask him, but I never asked him that question when I had the chance. In 2015, no, it was before 2015. It was in 2010, 2011, 6 of Tevet, 5771. So I don't know when Tevet was that year. This was either 2010 or 2011, either December 2010 or January 2011. Rav Shlomo, no, he's responding to something by, he's still the Sephardic chief rabbi of Tzfat is Shlomo Eliyahu, right? Shlomo Eliyahu. So he wrote a letter saying not allowed to rent apartments to Gentiles, okay, in Tzfat, and he got a lot of people signed it. A lot of people were opposed. It was a big controversy. Lichtenstein's Zatzal wrote a response. This is a translation of his response, okay? So he goes through a lot of things that we've seen before. I've read the document that you have disseminated throughout the country. As I read your words, I was impressed enough by the dogged determination inherent in your love of the land and your love of the nation that dwells therein to advance your approach. However, I'm concerned that in this instance, your love has affected your judgment, to say the least. It must be asked whether this is a battle worth fighting. Aside from the judgment, the wisdom of it seems faulty as well. Indeed, the most entire unfolding of events that resulted from the dissemination of this letter was foreseeable. A huge controversy, and everyone's yelling and counter letters, and okay, it was obvious. The public fear, both social and ideological, the rift that is opened among the citizens of the state between camps, within camps, the op-eds, and the various media outlets, all of these things. All of us foreseeable. One reads it and wonders what happened to the wisdom of those who are enjoined to consider future ramifications, right? You should have known this would happen, that you can't make a statement like this and get away with it without controversy. It has been particularly painful for those faithful to the Torah and mitzvot who fear for the stature and character of the state. It has upset the spiritual leaders who work hard to make the Torah and adherence to halacha beloved and who strive to set the state of Israel on the pillars of tradition and sexual heritage. We have an agenda of trying to make people love Judaism and love the Torah, and you're undermining that by creating this huge controversy that makes people think less of the Torah. But therein lies the problem. The prohibition of selling homes to Gentiles is presented as the exclusive halachic position in the matter of hands, and the voice that bursts forth from the throats of the signatories is made to sound like the single unequivocal word of God, that is halacha. Here one asks, is that indeed so? Without a doubt, the position expressed in the letter is based on rabbinic sources and a long halachic tradition, yet taken as a whole, the document leaves one with the impression that its conclusions are based on presumptions that characterize a particular but not exclusive halachic approach. The impression is okay. In other words, you're wading into this very fraught halachic topic, presenting a very simplistic presentation of what halacha is saying about this, and it's just not. The first paragraph of the letter gives the impression that RabbI linked intermarriage, selling a partial land to Gentiles, and the desecration of God's name. It further implies that there is no escaping the conjunction of these elements. However, there is no such formulation in the writings of Nationalism. Okay. 2, the concluding paragraph states that one who sells a residence to a Gentile must be excommunicated. This ruling is patently erroneous. The excommunication discussed by the Talmud and Rishonim addresses harm to Jewish neighbors in context of the issue of a neighbor's right of first refusal, unrelated to the question of lo techanem or lo yeshvu ba'artzecha, the prohibitions that set the tone of the letter. You're just making that up too. C, regarding what was not said, any position or opinion that could have been relied upon to moderate the stance taken in the letter simply does not exist. There's no mention of RabbI's position that limits the prohibition to the 7 aboriginal nations of Canaan, et cetera, et cetera. D, in addition, the document is based almost exclusively on the RabbI's position, whereas it approximates the perspectives discussed in the Talmud left its mark in the Shulchan Aruch. Yet every school child knows that for whatever reason, there is a wide gap between RabbI's position and the approach of the Tosafos. It is sufficient to leaf through the first pages of the Talmudic tractate of Avodah Zarah with an eye on the prohibitions discussed there, or through the end of the first chapter of that tractate to see the degree to which the Tosafos exploited every loophole and leniency with regard to these prohibitions. Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I conclude what should be self-evident. At stake are key questions that involve meta-halachic considerations, the willingness and ability to consider and assign appropriate weight to wide-ranging components related to halachic content and its connection to both historical and social realities mandates a much wider discussion. We who dwell in the Beit Midrash remain committed to our belief and desire to proclaim that God is upright, my rock, to whom there is no wrong. Okay, so even for ideological purposes, you can't distort halakha. You can't distort its complexity. And Rav Wolkenfeld, this is one of the last, I think, really among his final really bold public statements, and just defended the right, or not really, he just sort of pushed back strongly against this movement to claim that there was a prohibition against renting apartments, selling apartments to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael.
It seems, I mean, like with the medical, it seems almost there's a kind of like, I mean, not, I'm not trying to say exclusive, like, I mean, it's only a dimension, but there's a kind of legal pragmatism here that,
Yeah, because like, and that's Rav Herzog says, right? Precisely. I think Rav Herzog is saying, let's take the state, even if halakhically we can't fully justify equal minority rights and freedom of religion for idolatry, because actually we can protect Judaism much better using the mechanism of statehood, right? So, and the Hecher Mechira, like we'll sell the land to a Gentile during the Shemitah year to enable us to have a thriving agricultural, economy, right? Like it's be a little bit more contextual about what these prohibitions are meant to do. What's the purpose? And I think what he's saying as well, like we're trying to make people love Judaism. Let's not use it as this, to advance this sort of narrow political agenda that distorts the full range of halachic positions, right? Let's be a little more like holistic in our approach. Is
it therefore impossible within a halachic framework to view people as, having any equal status, equality before God?
So I think you could say that certainly somebody who isn't an idolater, or according to the Meiri, you could say anyone who is bound by the bounds of like sort of religious decency, whatever religion they practice, deserve, no matter where they live, whether in a Jewish majority state, or in amongst as our neighbors, in the diaspora, there should be no civil discrimination against any laws that discriminate against it. So the Meiri is there. He was there already in the 14th century, 13th century, right? Okay, so he was there already, and he does that, right? He says that all of these like discriminatory laws are about idolatry not as a theological problem, but idolatry as a moral problem, as an ethical problem. And if you have a group, a person, a collective that seems to be a basic, decent, moral society, then there should be no discrimination at all in any legal setting. And I think even the Rambam, who's the most restrictive, he can't deny the fact that the Torah has this category, the Ger Toshav, which is imagining that even in the most redeemed state possible, where the laws of the Jubilee are they're still living amongst Gentiles who live amongst us. They're just Gentiles who have their own religion that is very amenable to ours. But there's still no expectation that everyone would be exclusively Jewish. Certainly not in the world, and even in amongst us in our cities and in our living amongst us, right? So I think it's there. It's just the piece that's difficulty is that you have Christians who in some ways seem very, in some ways very monotheistic, in some ways not so monotheistic from a Jewish perspective, and so that raises halachic questions. And the Rambam seems to think that you have to defer some of that living coexistence to a more like a redeemed future, right? But certainly as like a vision, there's no the ultimate vision is a multicultural vision, I think. So that's there as well. Okay. Thank you very much. Next week we're doing Jews in a non-Jewish state, reverse. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Val. Thanks. I'll see you soon.